Good morning, everyone. This is Father Nate, missionary priest in Italy, and thanks for joining us today, February 11th, on No Greater Delight, our podcast on Marian feasts and Marian meditations. Well, today, February 11th, of course, is known as the feast of Our Lady of Lourdes, because it recalls the first apparition of Our Lady to Saint Bernadette. It was on February 11th, 1858, that Bernadette Soubirous, at the age of 14, went to gather firewood with her younger sister and friend. When they came to the canal near the river Gave, the other two girls just waded through, but Bernadette decided to stop to take off her stockings. And as she recounted to the police chief 10 days later, I heard a very loud noise in the hedge of a Machiavel grotto. I looked that way and saw the bushes moving, and behind them something white. I looked a moment, and then I knelt and prayed. That one smiled at me and vanished into the grotto. Over the next 5 months, Bernadette saw the lady, that she simply called that one, Aquero, at the grotto 17 more times, and she was accompanied by even more onlookers as the word spread. Interestingly enough, no one else saw the apparition, but many were convinced by the girl's radiant, angelic countenance while in ecstasy. On February 25th, Bernadette was told, "She told me to go drink of the spring." Our Lady indicated some bare ground near the grotto where Bernadette dug with her hands. But as she recounts, "But there I only found a little muddy water. At a fourth attempt I was able to drink. She also made me eat the bitter herbs that were found near the spring, and then the vision left and went away." The 300 witnesses were disconcerted to see the angelic face covered with mud and grass. But on March 1st, Bernadette's friend Catherine Latapie regained the use of her dislocated arm after plunging it in the spring, which was now a torrent. It was the first of many healings at Lourdes. On March 25th, Bernadette asked the lady's identity. She lifted her eyes to heaven, joined her hands as though in prayer, and said to me, "Que soy era Immaculada Concepção," incorporating into the uneducated girl's Pyrenean dialect the terminology of the papal dogma issued 4 years before. I am the Immaculate Conception. Saint Bernadette then became a Sister of Charity at Nevers, where her incorrupt body is now enshrined. So we might think, well, what else could you have on such a fantastic day? Well, the Abbot Orsini tells us that it's also the celebration of Saint Mary of Lucé, near Calais, France. This monastery of the order of Premonstratarians, those guys, was founded in the year 1131 by Robert, Lord of Lucé. Not a whole lot more information. But then also, interestingly enough, we also celebrate Nuestra Señora de la Cortés Acariagua Portuguesa in Venezuela, because it was on this day that an image appeared in the bark of a tree in 1702. That's really, it's like Our Lady of the Trunk. So what is the story here? Well, it was in February of 1702 that Margarita had gone to complete a vow she had made to Our Lady of Coromoto in thanksgiving for having restored the health of her son. And so Margarita went with her son to the shrine of Our Lady of Coromoto. They, made their thanksgiving, and then as they were coming back, they stopped at a tree, tied up their donkey, and decided to, rest in a hammock that was there. So after a little bit of time, the boy realized that the donkey was frightened. And so he's like, okay, well, what's going on? And he saw there was this brilliant light on the tree trunk, right? So the two of them drew near, and they noticed that the trunk had, right there, just like perfectly clear, an image of Our Lady holding the child within her arms. Okay? So Margarita cut it out of the tree with a knife, and then put it nicely together in a cloth. So then, because of, this sort of story, we're not entirely sure what day the apparition took place, but they think that it's probably February 11th of 1702, which is why they celebrate it today. So they were going to continue their way and just go back home when all of a sudden the donkey just started taking off. He just ran. And so the poor group, the mom and her son, had to walk all the way back to the town. But interestingly enough, when the donkey ran, he ran to the door of the church, right? And so the Capuchin priest there, the pastor of the church, wondered, well, whose animal is this, right? And so he sent one of his workers to go and look around, and this worker found Margarita, who had, walked back to town. And so she went to go get her donkey. And in the meantime, the donkey had gotten inside of the church, and Margarita couldn't get him to get up or to move. So why was that? Well, of course, there's the image inside, which was placed in the church, and now actually the image of Our Lady of the Trunk has its own cathedral. So that is what we're celebrating today, February 11th, in the Marian world. For today's reading from the Imitation of Mary by Alexander de Rouville, we continue with Book 2, which concerns Mary's life and virtues from Jesus' birth unto his death. And today we'll consider Chapter 20, on silence. It starts off with the believer and then gives us the response of Mary. The believer. I turn to you, Queen of all the virtues, to learn when to be silent and when to speak. You practice the virtue of silence in a perfect way. Let me learn from you how to practice it. The Gospel records few of your words for us. You never spoke except to show men some virtue. What love of purity, what humility and submission we see in the words you spoke to the angel when he came to greet you in the name of the adorable Trinity. In Elizabeth's house you spoke only to thank God for his favors. When you found Jesus in the temple, you spoke to him of your maternal love, and you spoke at the wedding feast of Cana in order to meet the needs of others, which love had made your own. But you kept silence on many occasions, when it seemed you should have expressed your thoughts to people close to you. For witness to the marvels that accompanied the birth of Jesus, we must go to the account given of them by his first worshippers. Nothing that they said escaped you, but, as the evangelist points out, you treasured all these things and reflected on them in your heart. That's Luke 2:19. In the temple, after presenting the child Jesus, you kept a wonderful silence that is a lesson for us. Later, you went forth with Jesus to Calvary and stood at the foot of his cross. You heard his final breath. During all that time, you kept the perfect silence of patience and resignation to God's will. And now we have Mary's response. My child, my silence itself speaks to you, and all devout souls understand its language well. We should speak only when circumstances, or the glory of God, or love for our neighbor requires it. Apart from these cases, it is better to be silent. In silence we find the spirit of recollection, and the grace of God which is its source. We learn that to be recollected, an interior people, we must speak but little, and then say what the Spirit tells us in our heart we ought to say. Readiness to speak too much is the sign of a distracted heart and mind, and such distraction is already a great evil. Sentiments of piety easily vanish in the course of conversation. Silence, on the contrary, preserves and strengthens them. You will find few people who repent of having kept silence, but many who regret having said too much. The wise man speaks only when the right time comes, that's Sirach 20, verse 6. That is, when silence would be wrong or unfitting. The man who cannot guard his tongue is like an open city, Proverbs 25:28, exposed on all sides to the surprise attack of the enemy. Where words are many, sin is not wanting, Proverbs 10:19. The man who speaks less is always the more prudent. Constant experience tells us that where there is greater silence, there is greater innocence. Remember the principle that it is always better to remain silent when there is no need to speak. It is a great art to be able deliberately to speak or remain silent, and men can be quite expert in everything else but ignorant here. Grace gives us better instruction than all the teachings of men. My child, the less you speak to creatures, the more God will speak to your heart. Think of the countless useless things that ordinarily are the subject of the world's conversation as being an obstacle to the holy relationship God wishes to have with you. Above all, say little to men about your afflictions and difficulties, for they are not as interested in them as you think. Rather, speak much of them to God, who is always ready to console you. If your crosses have been caused by men, do not tell them to anyone unnecessarily. You will often have cause for regret if you say too much.
Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed our Marian podcast. As St. John Paul II teaches us, from Mary we learn to love Christ, her Son, the Son of God. Through her intercession, may we grow ever closer to Him. We encourage you to share this with a loved one or friend and help spread our devotion to Mary. Thank you, and God bless.